Welcome to the Institute of English Studies at the Faculty of Letters of the University of Wrocław. My name is Justyna Deszcz-Tryhubczak, and I'm Associate Professor at the Institute of English Studies, where I coordinate the Center for Young People's Literature and Culture. I'm also a member of the Center for Research on Children's and Young Adult Literature at the Faculty of Letters. In both centers, my colleagues and I study cultural texts addressed to young people and collaborate with them and with adults to see how these texts can help us all, regardless of age, to think about ourselves and our world. The title of my talk is Thinking About and with Pets in Shaun Tales from the Inner City. This book, Tales from the Inner City, has fascinated me for a long time, and I often return to it. And today, I would like to share it with you. Tales from the Inner City was published in 2018, and it has been translated into Polish. It contains 25 stories about people and animals and their common world, a city, an environment created by one species, humans, just for themselves, but of course also inhabited by so many other species. So the book is about how humans and animals live together, how they depend on each other. And these tales are also about what animals have meant to humans throughout history, and most importantly, about trying to imagine how animals may see us and how we can tell about what they can see. In the slide here, you can see the contents of the book. So instead of traditional list of chapters, we have images of animals and page numbers for the stories about them. But first, let me tell you about Shaun, as I would like to use this opportunity to encourage you to explore his works. They are all thought-provoking, but what I like most about Shaun is his wild imagination. Shaun is an Australian illustrator. He's an author and an illustrator of his picture books in one person. He both writes and illustrates his picture books. In 2010, a short animated film based on one of his picture books, The Lost Thing, won the Oscar for Best Animated Short, and 10 contributed to the making of this film. And in 2011, Shaun received Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award from the Swedish Arts Council. This is the biggest prize in children's literature. And in the slide here, you can see the covers of most of his books, and most of them have been translated into Polish. Now, to appreciate the experience of reading a book by Shaun, let's look for a moment at this double spread from The Lost Thing. It can be quite a complex experience. So you read the text. So, for example, you read, "So you want to hear a story?" Well, I used to know a lot of pretty interesting ones. But then you are distracted by all these images on the page, which also contain words, and for sure you are tempted to examine them. And so you stop reading, you stop following the story to contemplate all these images. So to read such a book, you need to return to it several times, I think, to be able to notice and understand all the details and their importance for the narrative. And here is a double spread from The Arrival. It's a wordless picture book or a graphic novel, as some scholars refer to it as well. And I said that it's wordless, so there are no words in it. Well, not exactly. There are no words in a language that exists that we would recognize. But there are some, and we can see them in the images here, in the fantastic language imagined by Shaun. And of course, we may try to speculate what they mean. So reading The Arrival is equally complex and multi-layered. Tales from the Inner City was published, as I said, in 2018, and some of the stories are told only in words, some of the stories are told only in images, and some of the stories are told both in words and in images. And sometimes we have a single narrator speaking of her or his own experience. Sometimes the narrator speaks for a group of people, but all these narrators are trying more or less successfully to understand how this common world of people and animals works and how to make it happen, how to make it work. Some of the stories are very light and hopeful, and some are sad. They describe human and animal vulnerability, weakness, suffering, and death. And as I mentioned, the book brings together quite a lot of animals. And as you can see here in the slide, these are images from the book, some of them. And we have wild animals, endangered species, pets or companion animals or species as they are called. Uh, some of them are totally imaginary animals. Then mentions that it's the animals he sometimes dreams about. But anyway, in the book, we can see the multiple ways in which animals inhabit our stories, our lives, and our history. Matthew Cole and Kate Stewart, two scholars working on representations, so images or depictions of animals in culture, say that the ways that humans think of and behave towards animals fall between two extreme positions, which are related to utility or disutility of animals. So the question is, for example, whether an animal is a friend or food. And in the diagram from their book, you can see the long distance between pets, so friends, on one hand, and food animals on the other hand. Another concept that these scholars talk about is sensibility or non-sensibility in these depictions of animals. So it's mostly about how little attention is devoted to food animals and how much attention is given to pets. And today I would like to focus on pets indeed, but only to show how we can broaden our emotional connections from pets to other animals and how literature can help us with this. I guess that many of you live in multi-species households, shared between humans and animals. In my case, there are three humans, my daughter, my husband, and myself, and sometimes spiders and ants. And we have two bunnies. One is a lop-eared bunny, that's Coco, and the other one, I think, but I'm not sure, is a lionhead bunny, and that's Pishu. And I have said that we have them or that we own them, but in fact, it's two-directional, reciprocal. We have them, but they have us as well. And the bunnies have been with us for almost 2 years, and I'm fascinated with how our lives keep being transformed by their presence every day. And today I would like to share one of 10 stories with you and propose how we can think with it about pets, your pets or pets in general, right? How we can think about how we live with and develop friendships with them. I think that even if you don't have a pet yourself, you will find Ten's story interesting. And I would like to draw your attention to the word kinship. It's an important word when we talk about connections between animals and humans. According to Cambridge Dictionary, a kinship is either the relationship between members of the same family, kin means family, or more broadly, it's a feeling of being close or similar to other people or things. So kinship, making kin are terms proposed by Donna Haraway, a biologist and a philosopher, to talk about multi-species connections. And you can see Donna Haraway in the photo here with her dog Cayenne Pepper, and you also have a cover of her book, When Species Meet. So we can ask a lot of questions about this kinship. For example, the question about this mutual ownership, who has whom, that I mentioned earlier. Or we can ask about how we think about our communication with pets, or how do we live with these other beings alongside us. And through this reflection on pets, I would like to invite you to think more broadly about how we can better understand animals' presence in our lives and our presence in their lives. How can we be in the world with them in caring, compassionate, and respectful ways? In my talk, I will be relying a lot on Erica Fudge's work as well, her work on pets. And she's one of the leading scholars working on representations or images of animals in culture. And you can see her book and Erica Fudge herself in the slide as well. More generally, we will be touching on human-animal studies. This is a rapidly growing scientific field that examines the complex and multidimensional relationships between humans and animals. It's an interdisciplinary field. It includes the social sciences, sociology, anthropology, psychology, political science, the humanities, so history, studies of literature, the visual arts, cinema and popular culture, philosophy, and the natural sciences, so ethology, the scientific study of the behavior of animals in their natural environment, veterinary medicine, and animal welfare science. Animal welfare science is the scientific study of the well-being of animals as pets in zoos, on farms, and in the wild. And what unites human-animal studies is a determination to find new ways of thinking about animals and about human-animal relations. Now, I would also like to stress, after Carrie Wolfe, an American scholar, again, one of the key figures studying animals and culture, that human-animal studies as a field has nothing to do with whether or not you like animals. It's a response to what we keep discovering and learning about many animals, about the richness of their lives, the complexity of their communication and interactions. Here in the slide, you can see some sample publications in human-animal studies. And as a children's literature and culture scholar, I'm interested in how animals are depicted in literary texts, films, television, visual arts, and other media, other cultural forms addressed to young people. I study how these depictions or representations of animals show humans changing attitudes towards them, and in particular, how they help us explore ecological, biological, psychological, and ethical connections between our own species and other species, including plants, by the way, but that's another story for another lecture. I look in particular for kinship imaginaries, so descriptions of human and animal social lives, in which animals are subjects of their own lives, which of course intermingle with human lives in diverse ways. And I think this kind of reflection is important in our culture, which is based on this utilitarian instrumental approach to animals. So I have shared with you so many general thoughts, and I think it's high time we read something together. And here is a story about a parrot, and I have included the Polish translation to make it easier to follow. So I will read the story to you, but I will stop a couple of times to share with you some thoughts and questions that I think the story invites. And let me add that the story was most probably inspired by Ten's real life experience, his life with Diego the parrot. And you can see both of them here in the slide. So now let's move on to the story, to part one. People who don't live with parrots always ask the same question of those who do. Can your parrot talk? From the cradle to the grave, our lives are measured, trimmed, emboldened by words, and to hear another animal speak them back to us is nothing short of pure delight. Can we call it a language, or just some parallatric illusion? Maybe it doesn't matter one way or another. Maybe it's enough to feel that we are not entirely alone in our funny little world of words, spinning through the big dark universe as we are. And that's why people who don't live with parrots, always want to know if a parrot can talk. From the very beginning, the narrator divides humanity into those who don't live or live with parrots. And as we will see in the rest of the story as well, both groups are trying to make sense of the parrot's world. The narrator is trying to explain people's obsession with animals, with talking animals, through this idea of humanity's loneliness as a species, right, in the big dark universe, but lonely really with so many beings around us. But humans are looking for a species that they could communicate with in the human language. People who don't live with parrots anthropomorphize them. So they make them, and probably other pets as well, other animals more broadly, into pseudo-humans. And it seems it is so hard for them to admit that the parrot does not really speak a human language. And yet, as Erica Fudge notes, it is this transformation, anthropomorphization, that allows for a conversation between the species, a conversation that is at the heart of the human-pet bond. For Fudge, our imaginative thinking makes it possible to contemplate other lives, both human and non-human. It makes it possible to appreciate other modes of perception and communication. This engagement with others, as Fudge further explains, is vital for living with other people and animals. It's central to compassion and care for others, both human and animal others. And this is, I think, the question we are left with in this first passage, the question of how to use our relational imagination. I think that literature definitely may help us here. Let's move on to part 2. People who don't live with parrots always ask if a parrot can do tricks. That's because humans love tricks. So it happens to parrots. They can do almost anything with their feet that a human can do, boasting twice the number of opposable thumbs. And while our own feeble mouths can barely crack a nut, a parrot's beak is a miracle of engineering, an ingenious hook and chisel vice, forged in an age of thundering reptiles, with all the sensitivity and grace missing from a handyman's toolbox. In some other universe of geological twists, it may well have been parrots building great technological empires and taking primates as pets, training them to speak parrot, do parrot tricks. Should they have evolved such wayward and unnecessary interests? What strikes me in this passage is the narrator's admiration for the parrot. And I like very much this kind of thought experiment or speculative exercise of imagining that it is a species of animals and not Homo sapiens that has built some great civilization. Mind you, the narrator is trying to stop the reader from making the mistake of thinking that we would then have just another order, another hierarchy with parrots at the top. Yet, despite the narrator's respect for the parrot, it has not really been freed from the limits of this diagram that I showed you earlier. The narrator mentions the parrot's abilities in terms of their value to humans, but it's impossible to really fully know what a pet feels, because we will always think in human terms, forcing our own human perspective based on our own human experience onto it, in a way transforming it. But this limitation of our human mind does not mean that we should think that pets and animals more generally do not have experiences as rich as our own. We do not have time to discuss this philosophical question. It's a philosophical question, I think, of how we can know an animal mind. But I want to refer you to a very interesting article, which in a way has initiated the whole discussion about this. It's an article by American philosopher Thomas Nagel, published in 1974. The title is What is it like to be a pet? And Nagel says that while a human might be able to imagine what it is like to be a pet by taking the pet's point of view, it is still impossible to know what it is like for a pet to be a pet. We'll come back to this for a moment. But let's move on to part 3. People who don't live with parrots will always marvel at the familiarity of their intelligence, their playful curiosity, their friendly faces, bright with intention and knowing smiles, their anthropomorphic little souls. Look at how they move their feet in time to music, and the way they cock their head to one side. They are just like you and me. So say the people who do not live with parrots. And here again, the narrator is criticizing those who do not live with parrots, trying to distance himself from turning pets into pseudo-humans and from ignoring differences between humans and animals. The other people seem interested in what may please a parrot and in what makes him or her happy, but they still rely on human terms and expectations. They take the parrot's behaviors described in this passage and also in passage that I read before, as an expression of her or his loyal companionship. right? This is what pet keepers often expect in exchange for food and shelter, right? And this is the foundation of human-animal bond. It's economic. But let's move on to part 4. As for us, the people who do live with parrots, we see no such reflection in nature's mirror. Behind those small mercurial eyes that stare so fiercely into the noonday sun without flinching, there clicks a primeval arithmetic that grants no access. When happy, a parrot will grind its beak angrily. When angry, it will dance happily. It bites us with enough affection to draw blood, and the most sacred gifts of devotion are delivered as vomit. And even for such an inverted expression, all these chauvinistically human words, happiness, anger, devotion, are just meaningless chaff in the breeze. They are nothing compared to the squawk of a parrot, blanching our eardrums like a morning prayer straight out of the Jurassic, allowing no room for translation or reply. A parrot asks for neither. A parrot has already stolen our food, defecated on our shoulder, and flown off to find something more interesting. Now, the parrot's vomiting may sound a bit strange, but it's a perfectly normal behavior in birds, and usually not a reason for concern. It occurs when a bird throws up small amounts of food with the intention of feeding it to a loved one. And it's related to bird parenting. It's a very efficient way of delivering food to birds' babies. Because the food has already been warmed up and because it's partially digested, it's a little easier for the babies to absorb it. Regurgitation, so this vomiting, in other words, is also a way that birds show each other that they are interested. This is courting behavior very often, and it's very common for pet birds to regurgitate on their favorite people or their favorite toys. So if your bird regurgitates on you, it's most likely a sign of affection. So the narrator has learned the parrot's language through careful observation. It's the language of the body, the language of behaviors, of sounds. And he appreciates that the parrot is making his or her own signs. Some of them were mentioned in the previous passage as well. The narrator is interested in what the parrot might actually be doing, feeling, thinking, but through what the parrot is making available to him. And he's making the effort to imagine what it is like to be a pet, and in particular to think about the parrot's pleasure, admitting that human pleasure is not the only knowable pleasure. So the parrot is an active, communicating being, shaping the world around just as humans do. And we can attend to all this with our senses, through our care. And once again, we cannot experience the world as pets or animals more generally do, but it does not mean that their experiences are in any way less real. The parrot should be perceived and respected and appreciated as parroty in his or her own right. Now let's move to part 5. But when that same parrot returns, leans in against our face to preen her eyebrows, our sorry excuse for feathers, it does so with such surprising tenderness. Can we call it love? Yes, let's call it love. The parrot will not mind. It will let us think whatever we want. Its heart trembles against our cheek like tiny jungle drums. The earth turns once again on its billion-year axis, and we think quietly to ourselves, what a strange privilege it is to be here, now, and living with a parrot. In this final passage, the narrator seems to conclude that we can care for the pet as a lovable creature without demanding love in return and with respecting its silence, its non-response, its disinterest. And maybe we can accept both a pet's agency and its dependence on us, recognizing both differences and similarities. As Donna Haraway stresses, it's our contact, our meeting with animals, rather than how useful they are to us, that really matters. This relational imagination practiced by the narrator may help us live happily with pets, even if we realize that we cannot know everything about those with whom we share the world. And finally, This is the image at the end of the story. It concludes the story. And I'd love to hear your comments. Of course, the parrots and the man's sizes are striking. To me, the parrot size says that the parrot or any other pet, any other animal, is such a complex and mysterious being, and that there is so much to learn about them, so many unknowns. The parrot size stands for the vast knowledge and understanding of animal life and of interspecies relations that we still need to gain to appreciate our sharing the world with animals. So you look at your pet, and there is just so much to contemplate. It also seems the man is inside a birdhouse or anyway, some kind of enclosed space. Maybe it's the small space of his mind or the narrow focus of the human perspective. Or maybe it's his superficial understanding of the parrot, but the parrot has got inside. It is so close to the man. And maybe there is a chance to get out of this limited space through kinship through empathy for, and curiosity about pets, and more broadly, animals. But in the end, also through learning about the nature of the human species. Erika Fudge puts it in a very appealing way. I like it very much. She says that we house train pets, so we teach them how to behave in our apartments, our houses, but they world train us. So our pet helps us to understand the world and ourselves and how we should live in it. I hope I have managed to show you at least a little bit of how Shaun story about the parrot makes us aware that pets play a central role in how we think about ourselves and our relation to the planet we live on. It's possible to think not just about our companion animals, but also with them and perhaps reimagine ourselves. This is the privilege of sharing our lives with pets. And this rethinking is especially important in light of the massive loss of biodiversity that we are witnessing right now. It's the loss of the variety of all living things on Earth and the web of life they create, on which, of course, we depend for oxygen, water, food, and many other benefits. But of course, it's important on its own, in its own right. It is thought that 1 million animal and plant species, almost a quarter of the global total, are threatened with extinction. And some scholars warn that it's possible that we will indeed have to face species loneliness, sadness caused by loss of relationship. Pets, real ones, and those represented in texts of culture, prevent us from this loneliness. They offer us a way to stop believing that as humans we are at the top of a hierarchy of life. They show us how our worlds are connected to those of other species in numerous ways each day, encouraging us to imagine and practice new models of living with nature. I sincerely encourage you to have a look at the other tales from the inner city about pets and many other animals. And if you have any comments or questions, please get in touch, perhaps with your teacher's help. I'd love to hear your thoughts about human-animal relations. Here are my references, so the sources I relied on in my talk, and once again, my email address. Thank you very much for listening.